Welcome to the Kenya Wantum Notum Movement, KWM podcast. This is the deep dive, and here our mission is pretty straightforward. We take your sources, your articles, research notes, whatever you've got, and we try to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight.
That's right. And today we're looking at a really quite a striking article from the KWM website. It was published July 18th, 2025.
And the title itself, well, it certainly makes you stop and think. It's called "Where Are the Doctors? Where Are the Psychiatrists? Why President Ruto's Mental Health Needs Attention."
Yeah, it's definitely not subtle. It puts its perspective right out there from the get-go.
Absolutely. Leaves very little room for doubt about its stance. So our job today, our mission, is to really unpack the core arguments here, the observations, and frankly, the deep concerns the author is presenting. We want to explore the specific claims, the perspectives it offers about Kenyan leadership, just so you walk away with a really solid grasp of what this piece is arguing.
Okay, so where do we start? The opening.
Yeah, let's start right there. Because what hits you immediately, like right from the first sentence, is how incredibly direct it is. The author just states flat out, something is wrong,
Right.
and then adds that you don't need to be a psychiatrist to see it. How does the article sort of build on that very blunt opening? It sets a powerful tone, doesn't it?
It really does. And what's quite effective, rhetorically speaking, is that they don't ease you in. It's an immediate, almost accusatory expression of concern about President William Ruto's mental health. And it immediately points to evidence, right? Specific recent statements attributed to him. Things like demands that youth be, quote, shot in the leg instead of the head, and what the author calls a casual dismissal of the loss of lives during protests.
Wow. So leading with those kinds of very controversial quotes.
Exactly. It establishes a confrontational and you could say deeply personal tone for the whole article. It's not just political disagreement.
And then the author doubles down, saying these words alone are, quote, enough to raise alarms. Then come those really sharp questions. Where are the doctors? Where are the psychiatrists? Where is the professional intervention that Kenya's leadership desperately needs?
Yeah.
It's not just saying I'm worried. It's an immediate, urgent call for a specific kind of intervention, isn't it?
Precisely. It creates this real sense of urgency for you, the reader. The article frames the situation immediately as one where, according to the author, professional assessment isn't just like a good idea, but critically and urgently required.
So it positions the president's own words as the prime evidence for these profound concerns, making it clear this piece is going to analyze everything through that very specific lens.
That seems to be the approach, yes. Using those statements as the foundation for the entire argument that follows.
Okay, so citing public statements is one thing, but then the article seems to take a pretty big step further, right? It starts interpreting not just what was allegedly said, but the manner, the implications of the delivery. The author calls Ruto's behavior more than just political rhetoric, labels it alarming. How does the article actually build that interpretive case? How does it suggest something, deeper is going on?
Well, this is where I think the argument shifts. It moves from reporting claims to, well, almost psychological interpretation, at least from the author's viewpoint. The article asserts these statements are, and this is a direct quote again, the kind of outbursts you'd expect from someone with deep psychological distress.
Okay, that's a very strong claim.
It is. And the focus isn't just the content, but how it's delivered, without remorse, without any sense of empathy, according to the author. So the suggestion is these aren't just random incidents, but patterns of behavior that the author clearly believes signal profound psychological issues. They even frame it almost like a cry for help.
So the author's basically asking us, the readers, to look past the politics, to consider a deeper, maybe more personal dimension to these public actions.
That seems to be the core of it, yes.
Right. They claim his demands, his violent rhetoric, and his inability to respond to tragedy are signs of something deeper. And then the conclusion, Kenya deserves better. So this isn't just political critique anymore. It feels like an attempted diagnosis, coupled with a call for a different style of leadership.
I think that's a fair assessment. It's an argument that deliberately tries to go beyond typical political commentary. The author wants to offer a psychological reading of the leader's public persona and actions, presenting it as a serious warning sign that they believe should concern everyone, no matter their politics.
And it doesn't stop at the spoken words or even the way they're delivered. The article then pivots, right? It shines a light on what isn't being said, particularly the government's response or lack thereof to recent protests. It talks about the chilling silence after the deaths of young people. How does the author use that silence in their argument?
Yeah, that absence of response becomes a really powerful rhetorical device for the author.
Hmm.
For them, this silence from the government signals, well, a profound lack of empathy, a lack of accountability from the leadership, especially during a time of national pain.
Mm-hmm.
The article specifically asks, has there been any apology, any concern from President Ruto after the killing of a young girl? And it points out there's been, according to the author, no rebuke of the police officers who treated protesters with brutality.
So it's painting the silence not as just, maybe an oversight or political calculation, but as an active, deliberate failure, a failure of basic responsibility from the top.
Exactly. That's the framing. The article concludes this lack of compassion is a red flag.
Okay.
It even suggests the government is failing in basic humanity. So it's not just an absence of words. It's presented, from the author's perspective, as a really deep moral and ethical lapse in leadership.
And then this concern, this focus on the leader's state of mind, it escalates quite dramatically. It moves beyond just individual or political fallout to become, in the author's view, a direct threat to national stability. The article says Ruto's behavior is more than just a problem for his political career. It's a national issue. What's the weight of framing it like that in terms of national security?
Well, that's where the author connects the dots in a very direct and, frankly, quite grave way. They argue that when a president starts spewing erratic and violent threats, it's a sign that something is seriously wrong.
Yeah.
And the core assertion is that a mentally unstable leader cannot be expected to lead a country effectively.
Right.
So it explicitly links the leader's psychological state, as perceived by the author, to the overall security of the well-being of the entire nation. It's a very deliberate move to raise the stakes significantly, prompting that forceful call for professional intervention we talked about earlier.
And it speaks directly to you, the listener, doesn't it? It asks point blank, have you thought about the fact that Ruto, as president, needs mental health support? And again, where are the professionals who should be stepping in? The author insists this isn't just politics, it's a matter of national security. That really tries to make it everyone's concern.
That's absolutely the intent. The author is clearly trying to lift the conversation above standard political critique. They're positioning it as a fundamental issue of governance, of national safety. They're making the case that, in their view, a leader's mental state isn't just a personal matter. It has tangible, far-reaching consequences for every single citizen.
We're digging deep into these crucial insights presented by the Kenya Wantam Notam movement, KWM, today. And look, if this discussion is sparking ideas for you, if you're thinking about change and how to contribute, remember your voice is important. We really encourage you to visit www.wantamnotam.com. Go there, create your account, it's simple, and start sharing your ideas. Your thoughts could help change your village, your city, even the whole nation. That's www.wantamnotam.com. Join the movement.
Yeah, it's a platform for exactly that kind of engagement.
So, building on these incredibly serious claims about the president's alleged behavior, about the government's silence assess, the article then directly challenges you, the listener. Again, it asks you to consider the implications now and for the future for leadership in Kenya. It argues that Ruto's inability to show empathy, his violent threats, his detachment from the reality of the pain his citizens are enduring, the author says all these things point to one inescapable conclusion: Kenya's leadership is in crisis. How does the author frame that? Is it like a breakdown in the social contract?
I think that's a good way to put it. The author is essentially arguing there's this profound disconnect, a gap, between the highest office and the people it's supposed to serve.
Okay.
They argue that Kenya deserves a leader who is, quote, mentally stable, someone capable of making sound decisions based on reason, compassion, and foresight. And they draw a sharp contrast between that ideal and what they describe as the current silence and perceived detachment from the leadership.
And that appeal to the reader, saying, if you care about Kenya's future, you cannot ignore this.
That's trying to make the crisis feel personal.
Absolutely. It's an attempt to bridge that gap and say, this isn't just something happening over there in politics. It affects you and the country's future.
And it's not just abstract concepts, is it? The article uses very specific, heartbreaking examples to really hammer home its points about the lack of accountability and empathy it perceives. It keeps emphasizing the tragic loss of life, saying so many young people have been killed during protests. How does using these personal stories work to amplify the argument?
Well, this is clearly where the author aims for a strong emotional impact. By naming specific individuals, the goal seems to be to take the abstract idea of governmental failure or alleged failure and make it intensely personal, deeply relatable.
The article mentions a young girl, just one of many, lost her life. and specifically names the 12-year-old Bridget Njoki killed in her home. It also brings up Boniface Kariuki, a Nairobi city mask hawker killed, and stresses there was no apology from the president, according to the piece. These stories, they're meant to create a visceral sense of outrage.
And highlight what the author sees as a profound disregard for human life.
Exactly, to underscore that perceived disregard.
The author really doesn't hold back, asking, how much longer can we ignore the toll that this government's failures are taking on the lives of ordinary Kenyans? They directly allege President Ruto has failed to acknowledge the deaths, failed to rebuke the police, and failed to show even the smallest hint of remorse. That's an incredibly strong indictment.
It is. And the article's conclusion on this point is clearly designed to provoke a reaction from you, the reader. It asserts this should outrage you and every Kenyan who believes in justice, fairness, and the basic human rights. These individual tragedies are marshaled as stark evidence, intended to solidify the author's broader arguments about leadership failures and really underline the human cost.
So the article lays out this perceived problem, this crisis, but it doesn't just leave it there. It builds towards a very clear call, a demand for action. It directly challenges you, the listener, to get involved. It circles right back to that initial question stating, we need doctors, we need psychiatrists, we need mental health professionals to step in and say, this is not okay.
What's the ultimate aim with this powerful call for accountability?
Well, what's really interesting here is that clear path it lays out. It moves from presenting what it sees as a crisis to directly empowering the citizen. The article stresses that a leader's mental health is not just his concern, it's the concern of every citizen.
And it strongly asserts that, in its view, a mentally unstable leader cannot be expected to lead effectively. So the author seems to envision a route where citizen action, specifically demanding professional assessment, could lead to real societal change.
And that final section is incredibly direct, isn't it? A real challenge. Kenya has been silent for too long. You have been silent for too long. It's time to demand accountability. It tells you, the reader, to demand that mental health professionals assess the situation, demand that the government acknowledge the crisis, and demand a leader who will act in the best interest of the nation. This is way beyond commentary. It's a direct plea for people to act.
It really is. It ends with this strong message of empowerment. This is your country. Your voice matters. Your actions matter. Don't wait for change to come be the change. And it expresses hope, right? Hope that by addressing the mental health crisis in Kenya's leadership, as the author sees it, we can push for a better, more stable future. It clearly outlines a pathway the author believes will bring about positive change. It's essentially giving the reader instructions on how to participate in fixing the perceived problem.
Okay, so we've unpacked an article making some incredibly serious claims about the mental health of a national leader, the impact on the country. Now, given how sensitive mental health is, and obviously the public role of a president, it raises some profound ethical questions, doesn't it, for society, for the media. When concerns like this are raised, how does a nation even begin to balance the privacy of someone in power with the public's right to know, their right to accountability, and ultimately to stable government?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's incredibly complex. You're balancing fundamental rights, the right to privacy, versus the public's right to competent leadership and safety. It touches on ethics and journalism, political responsibility, the role of professionals. There are no easy answers. And it forces a really difficult societal conversation about where those lines are drawn, especially when the stakes are perceived to be so high.
Definitely something for you, our listeners, to think about long after this deep dive ends. And that does bring us to the end of our analysis of the Kenya Wantam Notam movement article. Where are the doctors? Where are the psychiatrists? Why President Ruto's mental health needs attention.
We've spent some time really digging into these significant claims, the arguments, the examples, and those very direct calls to action that the author presented in this piece.
We genuinely hope this deep dive is giving you a clear, comprehensive picture of the insights and the specific viewpoints shared in this particular source material. And hey, if you're feeling engaged by this discussion, if the KWM perspective resonates or even just gets you thinking, please remember that your ideas matter. They really can make a difference. Yeah. So, one more time, we invite you to join the Kenya Wantam Notam movement over at www.wantamnotam.com. Create your account, share your vision, talk about what needs changing in your village, your city, your nation. Let your voice be heard.
Thank you for listening to the Kenya Wantam Notam Movement KWM podcast.